Okay, Unit 4 is World War II. Typically, this is a 2-day lecture, so I spend like 2.5 hours in class. But I'm gonna give you the quick and fast version. Again, in-class lectures cannot be replaced. This is just the best we could do in a short time. So let's get started. All right, America's World War II. All right, one thing that TEKS really wants us to focus on is what happens in the 1930s that led up to World War II. Before we ever get into it, there's actually a pretty big issue. It's a rise of the dictators. We've got Joseph Stalin here. He rises in the Soviet Union, also known as Russia. He's communist. In Japan, the military leaders take control. And the emperor has very little control. In Germany and Italy, we have fascists. Fascists are people that put the country above everybody else, above your rights, above your supply, your needs. Like, you want to eat, too bad. You don't eat today, the country is better. You know, you don't have freedom of speech, but the country is better, right? So fascists typically find a scapegoat, blame them, tell people that we got to do this for the country, we got to punish the scapegoat, and they always have this idea that I'm the only one that can save you, like almost as if they're the Messiah. Typical fascism. And the perfect example of that is Hitler with Germany. Now, this is a National Socialist. They become Nazis, way different than the communists of Russia. They're opposites of Russian counterpart, communists. We also have Mussolini. This guy takes over Italy. He used the newspaper to control the media, to gain power and control. But for our TEKS and our interstate tests, he's not as important as Hitler. Now, how Hitler rises to power is pretty interesting. Again, I had these practice questions on here. I'm going through them quick. We go over them in class, but over here, I just skip over them. If you ever want to pause the video, you can try your hand at some of these questions. Okay. Now, the League of Nations fails, and I've talked about this so much, I'm actually going to skip over this pretty fast, but the League of Nations was designed at the end of World War I from Treaty of Versailles. And if you remember, U.S. and Russia were not part of it. And the League of Nations is pretty much a joke. When Japan invaded China, the League did nothing. And the League warned Japan, you can't invade China, and Japan just quit the League of Nations. Italy attacked Ethiopia because one of the last countries not colonized in Africa. The League does nothing. Germany's going to rebuild its armies, expand, quit making payments, the reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler will quit making those payments. He'll build up his army. He actually creates an air force. He makes the army bigger. He starts producing more weapons, tanks, everything he wasn't supposed to do. He does it, and nobody stops him. The League of Nations fails, essentially. Now, Hitler gets to a point where he's actually pretty cocky, I would say. If you look at this map, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to try to zoom in here in just a second. But what Hitler does, he gets cocky enough to where first thing he does is he marches his guys out to the Rhineland. This area is supposed to be no troops allowed from Germany at all. It's still part of Germany, but no troops are allowed. It's part of the Treaty of Versailles to make sure they never attack France again. But he marches them in as early as 1936. He marches into Austria and takes over. And Austria welcomes him. They have parades. Hitler's originally from Austria. They welcome it. When Hitler rises to power in 1933, he changes Germany. It was going through depression in the 1920s, hyperinflation. You look this up. It was unreal how bad it was. But in 1930s, he's changed this around. He makes these promises. We're not going to pay these war debts back. And he doesn't. And people are like, okay, wow, you know. He goes, we're going to make Germany a great nation. We're going to be respected again. We're going to show everybody, right? He's going to march into Rhineland. Nobody stops him. People are feeling pretty proud. They'd love to be this. He's going to take the economy and turn it around pretty much based on industry with the Volkswagen. That's a whole other issue. But he's going to rebuild his army. He's going to give people pride again. So everybody's watching him turn around Germany. Even the U.S. ambassador, which was JFK's dad at the time, wrote back to FDR how a wonderful example Hitler has in Germany for us to follow, the way he's turned around the German economy. So people, even ambassadors from foreign countries, were just like jaw-dropped shocked about what he was doing. So you can imagine the people there loved him. And the people in Austria loved him enough to let him march right in. He even goes as far as taking, this is Czechoslovakia. What he's going to do is go right into Czechoslovakia in these striped areas and occupy those areas. And that's when other countries say, hold on a second. You know, you can do it to Austria. They love you. You can do it to the Rhineland. They love you. But they're part of Germany, right? But Czechoslovakia doesn't want you there. You can't do that. So France and Germany, they get together. France and Great Britain get together and they address Hitler like, you can't do this, so you got to stop. And they end up going with this policy called appeasement. Essentially, what appeasement means is when you give a little bit of something, hoping that that person does not take more. Okay, so they say, all right, Hitler, what do you want? And Hitler says, it's not my fault. The people of Germany, they want more land. They need land to live. And he goes, the people in this area that we invaded, all this area, these are Germans anyways. And so they should be part of Germany. It's only fair for us to protect our own people. And so he makes that point, and he's not me, it's the German people. And France and Great Britain decide, okay, fine, you can have this, but that's it, nothing else. And Hitler says, okay, sounds like a good deal. That's appeasement. Obviously, it fails miserably. He'll eventually pressure the Czech president, who was pretty old and senile at the time, and he just takes over Czechoslovakia. They don't like this. They don't put up a fight. There's not actual rural resistance or anything like that. And now Hitler, in just 1933 to 1939, before World War II starts, has gained all this power, all this land back. All of a sudden, Hitler has made Germany great again. Now, after he does this, after he violates this appeasement deal that he had with Great Britain and France, Great Britain and France warned us, all right, that's it. That's it. That's as far as you go. If you invade Poland, that's it. It's war. But to be honest, nobody probably thought he would actually do that, because on the other side of Poland, the country right here, is Russia. Germany's not going to invade Poland because that's going to put them in direct confrontation with Russia. Remember, that's why Poland was created in the first place. Poland was actually created as a buffer between the two. And that's just because the people after World War I, Europe was worried that Russia and Germany would fight again. So they created Poland. So Britain and France draw a line. You invade Poland, that's it. That's war, and we're going to go to war. I do love to point out the Dr. Seuss cartoon here. Dr. Seuss, you can see, if you pause and take a look at this, you can see he's making fun of this idea of the appeaser. This is not a good idea. But Dr. Seuss cartoons, we're going to refer to him quite a bit throughout this lesson. If I'm wondering what happens next, spoiler alert, World War II. Hitler does, in fact, invade Poland. September 1939, he's going to invade Poland. But what shocks the world is that he has a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. You see, he secretly discussed with Stalin, okay, hey, let's do this. I'll take this half of Poland, you take the other half, and we won't attack each other. So these two guys, the communists and the fascists, who hate each other. If you actually look at the history of Hitler, this dude, he rose to power in Germany and got military control because he blamed communists were burning down the government building. And so what he did was tell Germans, I need military power. We need a military government for now until we fix this communist issue. And then once he got all that power, he never returned it. He was only elected to assistant chancellor. He worked his way up from there and had total control. So these guys hate each other. But shocks the world, they have this non-aggression pact. It's pretty much over. I think it's 3 weeks, 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Germany invades Poland. They use blitzkrieg, bomb with giant bombers, rolling tanks, fast-moving tanks, and then the army marches in to finish it off and occupy. And immediately, once they get to Warsaw, they actually immediately start the killing of Jews. I remember watching one documentary where as soon as they got there, they took an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. They put him on top of the synagogue, or actually a wooden building, wasn't a synagogue, so the wooden building, tied him up on top, and then lit the building on fire. And when all the elders ran in to try to save him, they died, and the German soldiers just laughed. So this is 1939, full on. We've got issues already. Stalin, if you're wondering why he agreed to this, Stalin actually agreed to this because he wasn't ready to fight Hitler. He had decided, Stalin had decided that there's no way he could beat Hitler. And so when Hitler offered this, for Stalin, it was a way out. A year before this, Stalin went to the League of Nations and begged them to give him Poland. He said, let me take over Poland in case Hitler invades. I can slow him down before they get to the Soviet Union. And of course, the League of Nations was like, no, we can't just give you a country. That doesn't make sense. So now, Hitler did the thing that he was told not to do. He crossed that line. He invaded Poland. France and Great Britain were to declare war on Hitler. He actually doesn't go after them first. He goes up north, takes over Denmark. He takes over the eastern part of Europe, Romania, Yugoslavia, all those areas. They become nationalist, Nazi governments instantly overnight. It's like they just, okay, we'll join you. Denmark puts up a fight, but not much of a fight, and he goes north. Now, once he does that, he moves on France. And in France, it's absolutely amazing what he does. You can see why people are like, "Oh, this guy is unstoppable." If you recall World War One, Germany fought France for 4 years in the trenches, and nobody won. Germany couldn't take over. Nobody won for 4 years. World War II, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. When Germany goes after France, it takes them 30 days to conquer France. Within 30 days of his invasion of France, Hitler is sitting here with this famous picture in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Hitler has conquered France. Now, if you're watching this, you have to be impressed. This guy has taken a country that's punished, beaten, like on its deathbed, turned it around. Not only did he turn around the economy and make it great, he actually invaded all of Europe and nobody could stop him. The only ones left was Great Britain. And in Great Britain, all they could really do was survive. Once Hitler takes over France, he begins to bombard Great Britain nonstop. You can look at these cartoons, you can pause it and read them. You can see how they feel about Hitler. You can see how the Americans, Dr. Seuss is upset with Americans, how they're practicing, oh, it's going to be okay. Still thinking of the isolation. And this cartoon I actually like it because it shows the other side of why we say isolated. This picture actually here is the bombings in Britain. The bombings would go nonstop by the German Air Force. But luckily you have leaders like Churchill who, if you take a moment and read this quote, you'll see why he never quit. He spent most of his time convincing half of Great Britain not to give up. A lot of people in Great Britain wanted to negotiate a treaty with Hitler and just say, hey, he can keep Europe, just let us keep our colonies like India. So Churchill spent most of his time convincing Britain to stay in the fight. And even Great Britain had some close calls. The last of the British Army, when they went to fight Hitler in France, they're retreating, and it gets pretty bad. They get stuck here outside Dunkirk. There's a great movie called Dunkirk, and it shows how desperate they are to get the boys back to Great Britain before Germany just smashes through them. But that's more of world history, not U.S. history. But all this essentially is what happens, how World War II starts. And it's pretty ridiculous how long we wait before we get involved. So Hitler takes over in 33. He starts invading areas in 36, 38, 39. He invades Poland. World War II starts in 39. We stay out of it. And this is important for the test. You have to understand we stay neutral. Because between World War I and World War II, we believe in isolationism. Now World War II broke up, we are not going to get involved. Americans don't want to get involved. We've got our own problems with the Great Depression, and so we don't want to get involved in all that. As a matter of fact, the government will pass these laws, neutrality acts, to keep America from getting into war. And if you're thinking, well, how can you pass a law that keeps you out of war? It's actually pretty clever. They recognize problems from the last war, and to prevent the same things from happening from World War I, they made these laws. For instance, you can't get on a ship of any nation at war. So if you remember World War I, the Lusitania sunk, and Americans were upset, and they wanted to go to war. Well, you can avoid that. You don't allow Americans. You make a law that says Americans cannot go on a cruise ship going to any country at war. Then you had the issue where weapon makers were selling weapons and loaning money or loaning weapons on like IOUs and on debt to countries. And they loaned Great Britain so much money that American government was convinced to go to war to save these American companies. You can prevent that by making it illegal for Americans to sell weapons. So you can see the neutrality acts themselves. The whole point was to keep America neutral by passing these laws. But it didn't take long before FDR realizes they have to help Great Britain. Great Britain's barely surviving. France is gone, has fallen. So he convinces Congress to pass the Neutrality Acts in 1939. And here, nations are allowed to buy weapons from the United States if they pay cash and they transport it themselves, cash and carry. Okay. Now that was because if you pay cash, we're not going to loan you money, and we won't have to save you in the war to get paid back. And you have to transport it, you have to carry it yourself, means that we don't have to run the risk of us dying or getting sunk or getting hurt delivering it. So cash and carry. Sounds good, right? But it actually goes even further. So these are like steps towards essentially, oops, let me undo that. These are actually steps that lead to, that are leading us our involvement into war. Okay, first you have the Neutrality Acts, and then we kind of ease up with the cash and carry, and then we have the Lend Lease. And the Lend Lease Act pretty much said we would lend money, lend weapons, lease naval ships, naval bases, aircraft carriers, lend, lease, loan, whatever it takes to help anybody fighting for democracy. We're not picking a side. We're just helping democracy in general. And the rules of this are pretty much, we say, all right, Great Britain, we're going to loan you 200 airplanes. Make sure you give us back when you're done with them. We know what's going to happen. They're going to get shot down. They're going to get destroyed. They're not going to make it. And we have this thing say, well, if you don't give them back to us at the end of the war, then we're going to have to charge you for them. So essentially, we know what's really going to happen, but this is the best way we can stay neutral and not get involved. But FDR knew we had to help. We had to do something to stop it. So you take a look at these cartoons here. This is a famous Dr. Seuss cartoon. That ocean in between the beds saves America so many times. Lend-lease to our allies, Russia, Great Britain, and even China. We got to get money to them and supplies to them. Lend-lease, whatever it takes. Here's one that makes fun of the United States as FDR debates with Congress on whether to amend the Neutrality Act or not. Europe's on fire. And the funny thing about it is they call this a fireside chat. Because if you remember, that's what FDR was known for during Great Depression, talking on the radio to people at their fireside. This is a different type of fireside chat, right? And as you can see, the house is catching fire. So what happens if your neighbor's house catches fire? Eventually, you're going to catch fire. And so this cartoonist is actually making fun of this idea of us not helping. This chart actually shows you how much funds actually go to the Lend-Lease. You can see us going to, a lot goes to USSR, Soviet Union, but a lot actually goes to China. And that's important because with China, we are going to help out without declaring war. FDR actually wants to. When Japan invades China in 31, it was the northern part up here. In 37, Japan begins to invade a huge chunk here and along the coastline. And that's when we were like, nah, that's not cool. We can't do that. We're helping China. At that point, they're actually going through a civil war. They're not communists, but they're not fully democracy. They're actually fighting it out before World War II ever happened. But they, both sides, declare a temporary truce to deal with Japan. And so for us, China's fighting for democracy and fighting against Japan. And so FDR is really furious. He wants to help out. Like, we're trying to get supplies in. We get supplies here. We ship them here, get on a railroad, ship them over Burma Road, and then to railroad to get to China and other roads as well. That's how we're getting supplies in China. Because on the coastline up here, it's all controlled by Japan. So our only way to do it is through Burma, right? Which is great, except the Burma Road itself is pretty much like a one-lane dirt road on the side of mountains, and it's easy for Japanese planes to come, bomb the road, and stop the supply route. FDR wants to send pilots to go fight. His advisors say, you can't do that. That's war. We can't start shooting Japanese airplanes down. And so they come up with a different idea. They say, okay, Japan, we're going to lend and lease you some airplanes. We're also going to lend you some money. And guess what? We have a list of pilots from the United States that have just quit the armed forces, and you can pay them to go fly for you. So pretty much it's our guys flying our planes, but we're loaning it to China. And the only job of the Flying Tigers, you need to understand, Flying Tigers' job was to protect the Burma Road so that supplies could get to China. That's a big thing. So whenever students are like, what do I need to know? Just make it simple for me. I always say, hey, 3 parts. 1, Flying Tigers, protect Burma Road, which was supply route to China. And if you can remember that, you're good with the Flying Tigers. This is before we could declare war. We have not declared war on them. This is just us helping our allies. But it was a really big deal because it showed that we actually could beat the Japanese. We knocked out like over 300 of their aircrafts without losing a single plane on our own. So it showed that we actually weren't weak, I guess you could say. But the Flying Tigers is pretty important in that concept. Now, how do we actually get involved in war? Well, long story short, most people know this, the bombing of Pearl Harbor brings us into war. But the STAAR test, you need to know why Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. You see, when Japan invades China in 37, right, and then takes over all these areas, French Indonesia, China, 1940, the French control that as their colony. The Japan takes over that. They actually begin to take more and more. They're actually going to take all this area. If you get a chance to look it up, oh, here it is. Here's the picture here. This is how much area they actually control at one point. When they do this, it becomes a threat to us. Remember the Philippines? That's our territory. And then furthermore, China is an ally of ours. So when Japan does this, we give Japan an ultimatum. We say, hey, leave China or we're going to place an embargo on you. An embargo is when we don't sell or trade with them. We stop trading with them. And for Japan, that hurt them a lot because the number one oil producing country in the world at that time was actually America. So we're not going to ship them oil. We refuse scrap and iron. Pretty much their war machine, the Japanese war machine, this little bitty island here, their war machine was possible because of us. They could buy and trade from us. But if we cut them off, they know it's going to be bad. That's actually why they started expanding even more, because they realized, hey, we can't get oil from the United States. We got to find it in other places. And so Japan's full on. For them, America's going to become an issue. So once we place this embargo on them, essentially we're going to see that Japan decides that the best solution is war with America. Now, they're not stupid. They realize, hey, we can't beat America. Japan sits down and they look at America and say, all right, guys, we can't invade United States. Too big. We can't beat them anymore. They got too many people and they have too much manufacturing. They have too many supplies, too many resources. Japan realizes we cannot beat United States anymore. But what we can do is really, really hurt them so bad that it takes them a long time to recover. And as they recover, we're going to take over more areas in in Asia, and that's what they're going to do. As they're trying to recover from this big hit, we give them the biggest blow, the biggest punch. They're down on their knees. We're going to expand as much as we can. And then once the United States starts fighting back, we're going to say, okay, let's negotiate a treaty. And then they'll let us keep what we have. We'll stop the war from continuing. And so that was actually the plan. Japan never thought they could beat the United States. Never, ever, ever. So they devised this plan, and this plan was meant to attack a naval base right here in a place called Hawaii called Pearl Harbor. We have 4 of our aircraft carriers there. One's in Atlantic, another one's out on training. It's pretty perfect for them. We have battleships, we have submarines, we've got planes there. It's a perfect target for Japan. And so they will bomb Pearl Harbor. You can go into details about this, about the spies, about the different ways. We just need to know this for the test. Japan would attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. At very next day, FDR goes to Congress and calls it a day that will live in infamy. And he asks for a declaration of war, and Congress gives it to him. So Pearl Harbor leads to us declaring war on Japan. And then Hitler says, hey, Japan's an ally of mine, so Germany and Italy declare war on the U.S. And now we're in World War II, which means we have to fight in Europe, Germany, but we also have to fight the Japanese in the Pacific. We're fighting on 2 fronts, which means we will see 2 completely different types of warfare, actually. Now, back home, Americans deal with this. Every time you talk about war, you have to talk about the home front, right? We always talk about fronts like the European front or the Pacific front. The home front's an issue too. So my focus mainly is when I talk to students about this is let's do this quick and easy. It's actually pretty straightforward. You got to pay for the war with war bonds, which essentially is just a loan to the government. And then we're going to see rationing. And students know what rationing is. You don't realize it. But if you ever heard you ration your food so you don't starve to death because you're stuck on an island somewhere or you're stuck inside a house, you can't get out, zombie apocalypse. So you ration your food to make it last. The whole country practices this idea of rationing. You get sent a ration card, like this one, in the mail. Sometimes they're called ration coupons. It just depends who you ask. But in this case, it was a card. And on this card, this particular was a sugar card. And so you would get this in the mail, and you would go buy sugar, right? And if your house was big, you were allowed a bigger number of sugar. If your household was small, you had a smaller amount. You would go to the store and say, hey, I need a pound of sugar. They're like, all right, that's $1 for this pound of sugar. I need to see your sugar card. And so you would show them your sugar card, your ration card. They would stamp it, or in this case, hole punch it, and then give it back to you. You take the sugar home. You pay for the sugar and then take it home. You still paid for it and everything. And then on the way home, that sugar, jury dropped that sugar. It went everywhere. You got to go back. You get into the store. You say, hey, I need to buy another pound of sugar. They're like, all right, that's $1. Let me see your ration card. They look at the ration card and say, hey, I already hole punched you for this week. I can't sell you this sugar. Sorry. And that happened across America. And it wasn't just sugar. It was gasoline. It was rubber for tires. It was meat, bread, certain foods at certain times. There was rationing done by the entire country. And everybody supported this. This is different. Like, if you think about rationing now, no way would your family agree to only use 20 gallons of gas per week. No way. Wouldn't happen now. But World War II is different. There was this idea of volunteerism. I took it off my students' notes because you know what volunteering is, but you got to understand how far people went. Kids would go up and down the street and ask for pots and pans to donate it to the war effort so they can melt down the metal. People kept the fat from when they cooked and donated that because you actually use fat for gunpowder. Pantyhose were donated because pantyhose were made out of silk back then, and they needed silk for parachutes. So people volunteered their time, their effort, in a huge number never seen before. At home, the war effort for the War II, the home front for War II was unbelievable, and it'll never be duplicated again. It never was before, it never was after. Even Victory Gardens. People are encouraged to build gardens in their backyard, or in this case, we see it at a school. You see some students here at a school top in New York trying to plant a garden, not doing too well. But nonetheless, there's a point for this. Is if everybody plants a garden in their backyard and they grow some of their own food, that's more food in a supermarket that's not being bought. If that food's not being bought, it can be shipped over to Europe to the soldiers. That's part one. So it saves food. But it also saves labor. Because you got to think about it. There's not enough men to work the fields and go fight the war. So the fact that we have so many men fighting the war, we have less men working in the fields, and so less food is grown. So Victory Gardens, people participate in this. They did it in their backyards, like this picture at schools and cities. Towns had a community garden where everybody worked it, and then you can get what you need from it. Like World War II was different. You would never see this unity ever again. Now, we're going to talk about the minorities in the war. We're going to start with the women. You see some of these propaganda posters, probably one of the most famous propaganda posters of the time. Essentially, propaganda posters were put out, mailed every 2 weeks, and like a supermarket would put them in a window, and every 2 weeks they would switch out to a different one. This is probably one of the more famous ones. The Voice of America was in charge of a radio program at first that sent messages overseas to tell about the American, how great America is, and our viewpoint. They also ended up being over the propaganda of World War II as well for a little bit. But women play a role. In my notes, I always have students, I always point out, hey, women joined the Army and military for the first time, and the Army was called WWII. But the women were mainly clerical. They typed. They weren't frontline fighters. I don't have it on here, but in my tell my students about WASP, the women in the Air Force, and then you have women in the Navy, right? But the women in the Air Force, they actually flew planes. Because you got to think about somebody's got to pick up that plane from the factory and get it to the airfield. And women did that. So women actually flew airplanes during World War II. It wasn't in combat, but they flew airplanes. And I always point this out. World War II could not have been won without women at home. All the men were off fighting. Some women joined the Army to fill in these spots, like these clerical jobs, and that helps. But the big thing here is women begin to work in factories. This is where Rosie the Riveter, that's where she comes from. We can do it. Women can play a role. And they did. It was huge. It was important. We couldn't win the war if the men weren't fighting. If the men were at home manufacturing, wouldn't have won the war. Okay? If the women weren't there to make the weapons, the men would have had no weapons to fight. The ships, the airplanes, the weapons, it would have been horrible. As a matter of fact, I'd like to always point this out to my students. Hitler would not let women work in factories. His minister of labor begged him. It wasn't to the very end of the war where Hitler agreed to let women work in the factories because he always thought it it made America look weak, and he didn't want to look weak. But nonetheless, I always point out women play a huge role in that. Okay, so women are a minority that play an important role, but they're not the only ones. If you actually look here, my PowerPoint is entirely messed up, and I do apologize for that. The Tuskegee Airmen, these guys in the bottom corner here, they are the first African-American fighter pilots in war. They were experiments done. These guys came from all over the country. They took these tests. They were sent down to Tuskegee, Alabama, to airfield to learn how to fly. And there they faced some extreme racism. The commander was racist. And one of them actually committed suicide. It got so bad. And they were there for a while. And they wouldn't send them over to Europe until Eleanor Roosevelt showed up. And Eleanor Roosevelt says, hey, she goes to the white commander in charge and says, have you been doing your job in training these boys? He says, yes, ma'am, I have. And she goes, okay, I think I'll take a ride in one of the planes. And he goes, okay, I will get my plane. And she said, no, I want to ride with him. And she points to the first black guy she sees landing a plane. So this is this is the president's wife, the first lady of America, wandering down Tuskegee, Alabama, demanding why. She wants to know what's going on. Remember, Eleanor Roosevelt was known for civil rights, women's rights, helping the poor. FDR was pretty much a douchebag when it came to people. Eleanor Roosevelt was not. She was an angel. And the STAAR test says you got to know 2 first ladies. Of all the couple hundred years of U.S. history, 2 first ladies are important. And the first one, number 1, is Eleanor Roosevelt. She gets in that plane with that guy. She flies a couple laps. She lands. She tells that white commander, hey, you're right. He's wonderful. You're doing a great job training. He's like, thank you. And she goes, now let's go have a discussion why these boys aren't in Europe fighting. After that, Tuskegee Airmen will get sent to Europe to fight. But even then, they're put behind enemy lines. They're not allowed to help. It's pretty tough for them until they hear a distress call. You see, bombers are giant planes that bomb cities and fly away, right? They're boom, boom, boom. These guys are small planes. It doesn't look small, but they're actually much smaller than the bombers. Their job is to protect the bombers. But the American bombers were losing their escort, their protection. And so these guys heard the Mayday call. They came in and saved them. And the one thing about fighting in air is you don't see each other's skin color. When those bomber guys landed, they said, hey, we want those guys to protect us from now on. Who was that? And then they found out they were the black guys. And after that, Tuskegee Airmen will have one job, protect bombers. And they're disciplined. They never leave the bombers. They never get distracted or tricked by German decoys or anything like that. They stay with the bombers to protect them. And once the Tuskegee Airmen take control of that role, that job, they never lose a single bomber for the whole war. As a matter of fact, Hitler would get jet airplanes up in the air towards the end of the war. Tuskegee Airmen are the first ones to shoot down the first 2 jet airplanes in war with their propeller-powered airplanes. These guys were phenomenal. Now, STAAR test, once you know, African-American fighter pilots, they push for change. This is kind of part of what's called a double V campaign. Victory abroad against Germans would mean victory at home against racism. The idea was like if they prove themselves overseas against Germans, then people back home would treat them better. Double V, V for victory, was that concept. But these guys also play another role as well. After the war is over, President Truman looks at Tuskegee Airmen and other 2.5 million African Americans who signed up to fight, and he says, hey, this is dumb. We cannot desegregate forces anymore. These men proved that they're equals, if not better, than their counterparts. So because of Tuskegee Airmen and the 2.5 million African Americans who signed up to fight, because of that, right after the war, Harry Truman would desegregate the armed forces. Doesn't believe it's a good idea at all. There's 2 movies you should check out. 1996, it's called Tuskegee Airmen. Very historically accurate. It even has a scene from Eleanor Roosevelt. It's wonderful, but it's very old school. And then in 2012, it's called The Red Tails. It's more Hollywood effects. It's not entirely historically accurate, but The Red Tails takes place in Europe, and it shows them taking that new role. Tuskegee Airmen is really good about showing them training and what they went through to get through that. But nonetheless, minorities in war are important. This is what makes America so great, the different people that contribute every day that they have. Here's a propaganda posters for you. I won't go into details, but you can see, I go in details in my lectures, but I won't on here, but you can see how important, how common some of these become. Now, other minorities that have to deal with war are the Japanese. The Japanese have to deal with Executive Order 9066. Executive orders are legal. They're part of the Constitution. George Washington had 4 of them. George Bush had like 1,400 or something like that, a lot of them. Executive orders serve 2 purposes. If Congress is slow and not doing something they should be doing, the president can issue executive order and it becomes law. And it can't violate your rights, but it can become law. If Congress doesn't like that, then all they got to do is pass a law. And that's pretty much why executive order was there. All right. The other reason executive order would be there would be if the president had to pass a law and couldn't wait, like it would take too long for Congress to go through. That was the purpose of executive orders. Now, in modern times, Trump's using them to get his agenda across without any problems whatsoever. But back then, the idea was like FDR looked at it and said, hey, we don't have time for Congress to meet. We know Japanese spied on us in Pearl Harbor. We don't know where Japanese spies are. So Executive Order 9066 took first generation and second generation Japanese Americans, forced them away from the coast to these internment camps. Now, one year STAAR test actually caught a concentration camp, and I was shocked. Concentration camp is anytime you have a concentrated type of people there for a specific reason. And so it is a concentration camp. We just tend not to use that. That's why in my quotes I have internment camps on my notes. But nonetheless, these people are deprived of their homes, their businesses, and they're put essentially in prison. Now, that's a violation of rights. Like, that's due process. You can't seize anybody's property without due process. Seizure, search and seizure, you can't do that. Your Fourth Amendment. The Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment that says everybody has to have equal protection of the law, that's all violated. On a STAAR test, they've done that. They've asked which amendments, and that's a pretty tough question. Sometimes they just want you to know equal protection is being violated. And on our state test, it's easy because it's multiple choice. But nonetheless, you imagine, goes to the Supreme Court. Korematsu versus the United States, it goes to the Supreme Court, and they tell Korematsu, hey, in times of war, you don't have the same liberties. We discussed this before. If it sounds familiar, we talked about this in World War I with the Espionage Act. So this is nothing new. Now, the Supreme Court does tell FDR, hey, when war is over, you better let these people go. You can't keep them forever. And so essentially, he will let them go, but they don't get their businesses back. They don't get their homes back. People just refuse to give that back. In 1990, Bill Clinton will actually issue an official apology. And in doing so, when the government official issues an apology, that means that they're actually taking responsibility. And it essentially means that they're going to give reparations. And if you could prove you're related to the Japanese people who were affected by the Executive Order 9066, if you could prove you were related to them, the government wrote a check $17,000 for you. That was in the 1990s, 50 years later, before the government admitted this was wrong. It was flat out racism. All right, now, you don't have to know about Patton anymore. He's a really cool guy. You can just read from his quote, you can tell what kind of guy he is. When America gets involved in Europe, we first try to go through Africa, and we push the Germans, and we go through Italy. We get bogged down right there. Like, it gets tough fighting. Actually, we defeat Mussolini, and the Nazis come in and hold the ground. Like, it's actually pretty tough. Over here on this side, Stalin is barely staying alive against Germans. Like, the Germans push all the way through. We're talking about Leningrad, Stalingrad is being fought, like, down to, like, the hand-to-hand combat, house to house, barely surviving. The Soviets are desperate. Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union is begging America and Great Britain to open a second front here in France. So Germany has to fight one side and two sides. Stalin's begging for Americans to do that, and Americans will do that. They actually will open that second front here at the north of France, and what we call this D-Day. Now, these are called the beaches of Normandy. So in my notes, I put beaches of Normandy, and in parentheses, I put D-Day. D-Day is the day it actually happens. Americans actually would trick the Germans, and they will put fake tanks here and move them around at nighttime. And so Germans actually thought the Americans would come over here and attack right here. And so they weren't that prepared. But essentially, in 5 different beaches, 2 American, 2 British, and 1 Canadian, we're going to land at different parts of Normandy, Omaha Beach, Nebraska Beach, and Americans are going to take that. The best video you can watch for us to show you how horrible this is Saving Private Ryan. The first 10 minutes, it's of them arriving at Normandy in D-Day. Now, once they get here, once the United States gets here, we get that little foothold in there. Patton comes in the picture from Africa. They bring him back. He was suspended for something I don't want to talk about. And then he pushes out straight to the border here. And at that border, Germany will have the Battle of the Bulge and their push. Everything they have, all the last effort they have to stop the Americans they will push back. It's called a battle of bulge because it bulges out, but the line doesn't break. We push back in. Okay, it took us. This was D-Day was January 6th. By August 30th, France is liberated. That's how fast it happened. That's how amazing it is. Within 2 months, we're able to liberate France. Okay, they've been occupied for years. Once we got D-Day down, once we got on those beaches, once we took control, now we can liberate France, and we push the Germans back to their border. And at that border is Battle of the Bulge. Once we defeat them at the border, it's actually not bad at all. Americans essentially are hesitant to go full on force to attack nonstop, mainly because the Battle of Bulge showed that Germans had some fight left in them. We thought they were done. They surprised us with that, and it almost caught us off guard. So we were hesitant to go through. Once we get to Germany, we realized there's nothing but old men and young kids defending Germany. All the soldiers were outside fighting Germany. Some of the soldiers on the other side fighting the Soviets over here. Okay, so pretty much it becomes a race. We're heading this way to Berlin. Berlin's about right here. The Soviets are heading this way to Berlin. We're going to see who gets there first. And once we capture Berlin, the war is going to be over. And so that was the ultimate goal. Okay, so here I actually have some information for you. Everything I told you just now, you'll see Normandy. The beach Normandy is where we're going to land. This is known as D-Day. All right, 4,000 guys die in the landing here. Watch that video. Watch that Saving Private Ryan video. You'll see how horrible it is. 4,000 deaths in this one day. The whole Battle of Normandy from June 6th to August, into August, when they're trying to control the whole beach, it cost 73,000 American lives. 150,000 were actually wounded during this whole 2-month battle. To put that in perspective, the whole war, America loses 300,000 men. So almost 1/3. I guess you could say 1/4, right? 1/4 of Americans in the whole war die in this 2-month battle. That's how hard it was to gain it. We gave everything, absolutely everything, to get into France. But once we do that, we push through. The Battle of Bulge, like I said, is that counterpart where they try to counterattack us. Never breaks the line. We get reinforcements and push the Germans back. And by the time we get close to Berlin, the Soviets are there, and Hitler committed suicide. And then Germany surrendered a couple of days later. If you're wondering why it took Germany a couple of days later to surrender after Hitler committed suicide, they thought it was a lie, that Hitler didn't commit suicide, because there's an instance before this. Check out the movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise. It'll talk about this. It shows exactly. This group of guys tried to kill Hitler in Germany, and then tell everybody he was dead so they could take over. It's called Valkyrie. It's really good. But it took a couple of days before Germany officially surrendered after Hitler committed suicide. And so the war in Europe is over. On May 8th, 1945, that means June 6th, we land at the beaches of Normandy. And by June 6th, from June 6th, by May 8th, the following year, less than 1 year later, the war is over. It just really took us getting in. It took everything we had. And this is why we realized if we were just involved and stopped Hitler when he first expanded Germany in the 30s, if we were not isolated, this never would have happened. We would have saved, in the end, we spent 300,000 lives, American lives. 600,000 men were wounded. Like, if we had just stopped Hitler years before that in the 30s, this never would have happened. Okay. Now, I always tell students you have to know 3 Medal of Honor winners for the state test. The first one was World War I, Alvin York, if you remember. Second one, this guy, Vernon Baker. He is going to slip through enemy lines. He knocks out a huge portion of German area. He loses his whole platoon. Like, he's the only one alive. The very next day, they need a volunteer to start this new platoon to finish the job, and he volunteers. He goes, well, I've already done it half. I might as well finish it. And he's this young when he does it. But he's this old when he gets the Medal of Honor. Because if you notice, the guy giving him the Medal of Honor is Bill Clinton, the U.S. president in the 1990s. It took 50 years for the U.S. government to realize maybe we should give medals to minorities. They didn't at first in the 40s and 50s. They didn't. Bill Clinton actually asked the Army to do an investigation and find a list of individuals who deserve this. Even if they're dead, we have to give them an award to the families. Vernon Baker is the only African-American who's still alive. They got the Medal of Honor winner from World War II. So he's the only living one. There's other African-Americans who got the Congressional Medal of Honor, but he was the only one alive, and that's why that picture is so important. But that's why it's also important to realize how things have changed from 50 years, but it also took 50 years. It's unbelievable that it would take that long for that to happen. On this side over here, remember how I told you that they were tricking Germany by building up a fake military in the corner? They used inflatable tanks to trick the airplanes. They moved these inflatable tanks around at nighttime, and in the morning when German planes flew over, took pictures, they saw all these tanks from way above, and they thought that's where Americans were going to attack them at. This is the last picture of Hitler. He's outside Berlin, outside the headquarters called Eagle Nest, and he's outside there putting awards on little kids for protecting Berlin. He's hiding his left hand. He's got Parkinson's, we believe. He's about to die anyways. And he's giving these kids medals for protecting Berlin. It shows you how bad things were for Germany by the end of the war. It's just desperate. So he'll commit suicide. People argue why. Most people will argue that it's because what happened to Mussolini, the guy in Italy. His own people would hang him upside down, spit on him, mutilate his body, his mistress as well, and Hitler didn't want that to happen to him. This map shows you essentially our pathway. First, we did try Africa. We went through Italy. That's when Mussolini is killed by his own people. We did bomb from Great Britain before we invaded D-Day. Then we pushed back. There's a Battle of Bulge. And then eventually we get to Germany and we stop right before we run into Soviets. They pushed all the way to Berlin and captured Berlin. And so this picture here, it becomes infamous. Stalin told his troops, I want you to get a picture of us putting our flag, the Soviet Union flag, on the government building in Germany. I want that picture. And this picture represents the end of World War II. And Stalin says it was us. We defeated fascism. We defeated the Nazis. It kind of rubs it in that he got there first. Also, it's ironic because it's a government building. It's called the Reichstag. That's the building Hitler burnt down when he was assistant chancellor. He set a fire and blamed it on communists and said, I need military control of the country. So it's also kind of ironic that that's how Hitler became powerful, took control by setting a fire to that government building. And at the end of the war, Soviets plant a flag on it saying, we're here, it's ours now. So it's pretty amazing. Now, amongst, I won't get too much in details of this. There's a lot you could talk about how far, and it's really frustrating to talk about in modern times. But a couple definitions. As U.S. soldiers march towards, through Europe, they come across issues. Genocide is a definition of when people are murdered. A group of people are murdered. It could be religious. It could be skin color. It could be ethnicity. It could be because you all have glasses. It could be anything. That's genocide. The word Holocaust was given directly to the genocide of World War II. 18 million people, 6 million of Jews. And it was Hitler's final solution. That's why he called this. He asked the Jewish question before. He said, hey, who would take the Jews? Nobody would take them. The world's in depression. They don't want any more immigrants. So Hitler says, all right, my final solution is to get rid of all European Jews. Kill them. And so he builds concentration camps across Europe to kill the Jews. Concentration camps essentially are work camps. Death camps are death camps. You get shipped there and you're taken out and you're killed, murdered, nonetheless. Like this. How could they possibly do that to humans? And it's crazy. There's people discuss this all the time. How could a civilized, cultural society like the Germans, I mean, this is the place where Beethoven, Bach, philosophers came from. They were intelligent. How could they reduce to barbarity? The answer really simple is a slow process. 33, when Hitler takes over, he does it by blaming Jews. And people support that idea. By the Olympics in 36, Hitler actually has it where Jews have to carry papers to prove that they're German citizens. Then they have to wear the Star of David on their arm. Then they're not allowed to sit in certain places. They're not have certain jobs. They're not like teaching jobs. Like no Jews are allowed to teach. No Jews allowed in government positions. Then Jews aren't allowed to own businesses. Then it comes Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, where a Jewish man supposedly killed a German soldier in Paris. And overnight in Germany, there's riots. People destroy Jewish property and Jewish churches. And Germany says, hey, you know what? Jews, it's not safe here in Germany. We're going to ship you out to Poland. And you're going to live in these wonderful camps. Like they even had fake movie reels to show them that these wonderful camps you're going to live in until things calm down. We know now that was not true at all. They're shipped into Warsaw Ghetto. And from then they begin killing by bullets first, then by trying to gas them with carbon dioxide from cars, but they decide, hey, that wastes too much gasoline, that wastes too many bullets. And then, have you ever seen the movie called The Little Boy in Striped Pajamas, where they poison? That was essentially the quickest way to kill them and then burn the bodies. Horrible things that they did to Jews, from torturing to, there's a book called Night. This Holocaust survivor wrote this book. It's a thin book. I encourage students to read it. He talks about the day he lost his faith in God was at one of the death camps. He was young enough where they kept alive to do work. So when they killed the Jews, they had him with pliers go pull the gold teeth out of their mouths so that they can get the gold from their mouth. The Nazis had him go through all the luggage and get all the valuables out. He said the day he lost faith in God is when Jews arrived at a death camp, and German soldiers took Jewish babies, threw them in the air for rifle target practice. That's when he lost it. So again, this is why we don't let one man take power. We don't like it when one man uses a group of people as scapegoats. It's their fault. It's their fault. Let's get rid of them. They have to have papers to prove that they're good. And even then, they just take them off the street. It took from 33 to 39, and this is happening. It doesn't take that long. That's why we keep this in check. That's why we always worry about what could happen in other places when people follow one man blindly, no matter what he does wrong. So war is over in Europe, but the war is still going on in the Pacific. As a matter of fact, 3 months after Pearl Harbor, this actually happened, the Bataan Death March. And to put it simple, it was a death march. 5,000 Americans and Filipinos are surrendered in Philippines at the Bataan Peninsula here. If you zoom in here, they had to march all the way up to Camp O'Donnell. They marched without food, without water. And once they surrendered, they're forced to march and build this concentration camp. And Americans are going to die, half of them, half of 5,000 Americans that die along the way from Japanese torture. The Japanese will run them over with tanks if they go too slow. Japanese will randomly decide to practice their swordsmanship skills by charging on horseback and just cutting heads off random prisoners. They would push prisoners close to water, and after miles of in the jungle marching, if they got too close to water, the Japanese would kill the Americans. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. It was actually so brutal, the U.S. government kept it hidden. They didn't tell Americans. This was 4 months after Pearl Harbor. They didn't want Americans to know how bad things were. And this is over in Europe, things really started. We hadn't even had D-Day yet. This is a bad time. We didn't want Americans to know about it. But a couple years later, when we start winning in the Pacific, we're going to have propaganda like this. And they will call Japanese yellow monkeys. They will go after them in huge numbers, and they would not show mercy. Like what they did to Japanese was very similar to what Russians did to the Germans. Torturing, yes, but the rape was not common for American soldiers against the Japanese at all. And that's because the Japanese didn't have women with them. They, if they had any women with them, it was Korean sex slaves they took from Korea. So the Japanese are pretty ruthless, nonetheless. Okay, when that finally changes is the Battle of Midway. Remember how the Japanese never thought they could actually defeat America? It's absolutely true. Essentially what we have is the Battle of Midway is a turning point. I can't get into details of it, but we pretty much decipher, break their code, and figure out where they're going to attack, and we're waiting for them, and we beat them. Long story short, we just beat them at Battle Midway. So it's a turning point in the war. It's very important to understand. And then we begin our island hopping. We take one island, and then once we conquer that one island, we're going to turn the base to attack the next island. And turn that into a base, attack the next island. Turn that into a base, so we can attack the next island. Every island we had to take hand by hand. There's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese have been buried there. They had tunnels. It was fierce fighting. It took us forever to get all the way up here to Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And it was fierce fighting the entire time. And even once we get up here, we begin to bomb Japan. Firebombing. And they refused to give up. Now, none of this would have been possible without the help of the Navajo Code Talkers, movie called Wind Talkers. It's about the Navajo saves the day for chance watch Code Talkers, another minority American. Navajo Code Talkers were essential to the war effort. These guys, essentially what the Navajo Code Talkers, the U.S. government realized Japan breaks all our codes. How can we beat them? And they realized that one language Japanese don't know is Native American languages like the Navajo. So the American government went to Navajo reservations, recruited Navajo Native Americans to join the army and fight for the country. And so they could radio in from the field where everybody was at, and the Japanese had no clue. Okay, the perfect movie, if you guys, and there's one part of it that's always been discussed. If a Navajo man, every Navajo code talker was assigned a Marine to watch him. And supposedly, if the Navajo man was about to be captured by the Japanese, the Marine had orders to kill the Navajo man so that he wouldn't give up the code. We don't know. There's no proof of that, but it's always been speculation nonetheless. Could not take in those islands without Navajo code talkers. So again, during war. You do have to know a couple of things real quick. It was on a different slide. I didn't say it, but Eisenhower is in charge of Europe. So Eisenhower E is in charge of Europe. Nimitz N is in charge of the Navy in the Pacific. MacArthur, with a big capital A, is in charge of the A, Army in the Pacific. And Eisenhower just commanded all of Europe. These two guys did not work well together, to be honest. This guy here, MacArthur, is a big old jerk. History is starting to show how shitty he was. Nimitz was a hero. He's from Texas, so he's awesome. But Nimitz is genius. MacArthur is just a big-headed douchebag. And pretty much FDR, or actually this guy Marshall, you don't have to know him. He was in control. He was actually in control of all the military, reporting straight to FDR. Eventually, they got sick of MacArthur complaining. And they're like, fine, instead of one of you two being in charge of the whole thing, y'all split it up. But Eisenhower has all of Europe because Eisenhower wasn't a douchebag. Okay, and there you can see our steps. They attack Pearl Harbor early on. They go to Midway. We defeat them there. And then we begin our island hopping. And then once we get to Okinawa and Iwo Jima, you'll see us firebombing, like just bombing Japan nonstop. We actually conquered more China back, and we were bombing from there nonstop. Japan refuses to give up, If you're wondering what happens, you probably know this already, but essentially the war ends because of the atomic bomb. Years before this, FDR was addressed by, received a letter from Einstein, who was a rock star genius at the time that everybody knew, and some other scientists who said, hey, FDR, Germany is working on a bomb. And this bomb, one bomb can destroy a whole city. This is how serious this is. So FDR started Manhattan Project. And that was a secret project to create the atomic bomb. It was actually over 26 different cities. Under University of Chicago, they had a nuclear reactor underground nobody knew about. And it's all top secret. The headquarters in Los Alamos, very top secret. They actually created a whole city just for these scientists to build away from everybody, okay? Now, here's the thing. I didn't tell you this, but when Hitler surrendered in May of 45, FDR was dead. He died in April. So he didn't even see the end of the European war. And at this point, Truman's the president. He was vice president in the last election, and now he's president. That's the way it goes. And Truman didn't even know about the bomb until he became president. And then he gets word he's about to meet with Stalin. Truman's about to meet with Stalin to figure out how they can conquer Japan, how to make them give up. And Truman gets word that, hey, they're about to test the bomb. Truman actually canceled his appointment with Stalin, waited for the test, got the results from it, realized that the bomb worked, then came back and was very rude to Stalin because he didn't need him anymore. He didn't like Stalin. Stalin didn't like him. FDR and Stalin got along great. FDR called Stalin Uncle Joe, but Truman had like a little man syndrome. He was just a different type of guy. But anyways, Truman is the one who decides to drop the bomb. On August 6th, Truman says that he does warn Japan. He goes, we have a new weapon, surrender or else. He doesn't show them, he doesn't demonstrate it. He just drops the bomb October, August 6th over Hiroshima and say, surrender. August 9th, they hear anything back. So August 9th, he drops the second bomb over Nagasaki and Japan surrenders. True story. Japan was actually meeting. The emperor and the military leaders were meeting August 9th to discuss surrendering to Americans. Their big issue had been this whole time was they want to keep the emperor no matter what. And America was like, no, we want an unconditional surrender. That's why they hadn't surrendered immediately. After the second bomb, Americans tell the emperor, they say, hey, if we're going to drop a third one and if you don't surrender. And so, again, Japan says, we'll surrender, but we keep the emperor. And the United States gave in, fine, said, fine, you can keep the emperor. If the United States had said that from the get-go, you probably wouldn't have to drop the atomic bomb. That's my argument. That's just me. But nonetheless, They get to keep the emperor, and that's why we teach it. It's unfair and not true, but we teach that it wasn't his fault the war happened. We teach that it was the military leaders to control. In reality, if you go to world history, other countries, they say no, it was emperor. He was part of this. He made the decisions. He may not have had all the power, but he was part of the decisions that was made. Nonetheless, the second bomb ends World War II, but it also starts this thing called the Cold War. The arms race of the Cold War starts. Once the Soviets see this bomb explode, they say, hey, we need that. If America has that, we need that. Why didn't they tell us about it? Why are they keeping secrets? I thought we were allies. And right as soon as those bombs are dropped, the Soviets would declare war and join against Japan. And it's fruitless because we have an atomic bomb. But the minute those bombs drop, that's when the Soviet Union becomes distrusting of America. And you essentially have the beginning of the Cold War at the end of the World War II, almost immediately. You got to know certain weapons, and this asked me a couple times on a test. Radar was created for planes. Some of the stuff existed, but it wasn't perfected yet, to be honest. Sonar was for submarines and water. That's actually how they find the Mariana Trench during World War II. It's kind of funny. And then cryptic code breaking, that's really new. That's never been asked about in our state test, but it will be soon. Cryptic code breaking was the birth to modern computers. The British that broke the German code, it's amazing, but it's a whole nother story for that. Proximity fuse, I don't know why they make us teach this. It's the dumbest thing ever, but essentially if you came near this device, it exploded. But whatever. Antibiotics are huge too. The Germans did so many experiments on Jewish people that they created antibiotics. Like when they were trying to figure out how long to survive in icy water, what kind of infections they could give them, what treated those infections. And Germans wrote all this stuff down. The medical advancements, because of Germans torturing Jews, as bad as it is, was a lot. Jet and rocket engines were brand new. The guy who created the V-2 rocket for Hitler went to America in the 30s and asked the U.S. government to fund him. He's like, I'll create it for you guys. I don't want to create it for this guy in Germany. He's crazy. I don't want to create it for him. But the American government was like, no, that sounds crazy. Like, can you imagine trying to explain to somebody what a rocket is that never saw a rocket before? Like, you're like, hey, a flame shoots out the back of this plane. It doesn't make sense. But nonetheless, this is why, if you ever wonder why the government always sponsors these stupid projects at universities, like I went to A&M, and A&M, they made a cow that survived, that could live with a hole through its stomach. Like, why is that even necessary? But ever since the United States passed on the rocket, and it almost saved Hitler in war, ever since that, the United States would sponsor almost any project that colleges have because it could lead to something crazy. If you're ever wondering why that happened, it's because we screwed up there big time and almost cost us the war. Okay. All right. Now the legacy of war. Every time you have a war, you got to talk about the end results. 300,000 soldiers died, did not have to die. If we would just stop Hitler, if we were part of the League of Nations, if we weren't isolated, we could have stopped that from ever happening. Almost 700,000 wounded. Didn't have to happen. We could have stopped Hitler right away. Over 7 million people die around the world because of this. Did not have to happen if we would stop Hitler right away. We have the atomic bomb. One bomb, 140,000 people dead. Another bomb, 70,000 people dead, just like that. And then you have more people dying from cancer and the reaction to radiation and everything else. Crazy. You have the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials were the Nazis who didn't escape or didn't commit suicide. They were put on trial for what they did. And all the opposite of the same thing. Following orders. And after Nuremberg trials, the world decided you cannot just follow orders anymore. That's not okay. That doesn't excuse you from what you did. Germany's going to be divided up in 4 parts. We'll talk about that in the next one. Japan becomes one of our greatest allies. MacArthur will stay and be in charge of rebuilding Japan. And sure enough, even to this very day, Japan's an ally of ours. Now, this is World War II wrapped up. Many technical information for the state test. None of the cool stuff that I teach in class, so don't judge me on this. All right,